That night was a dark moon night, devoid of twinkling stars in the sky. Boonthing, a 12-year-old boy with sharp eyes and a special sense, was asleep on an old mat in his small hut, located at the edge of the forest of a remote village. A cold wind blew quietly through the cracks of the wooden window, carrying the scent of damp earth and nocturnal plants. Suddenly, the chime of an old bell echoed from the direction of the cemetery on the hill. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder and louder, as if to pierce the dead silence of the night. Boonthing jolted awake in shock, his face visibly pale. His heart hammered wildly in his chest. He sensed an invisible energy. It wasn't a natural energy. It was a mysterious force, pulling him irresistibly. It was a call he had never heard before, and it was demanding him to do something on this darkest of nights. Boonthing lay frozen on his old mattress, trying to calm himself and believe that what he heard was just a dream or the wind. But the bell continued to ring in a slow, steady rhythm, yet so firm it seemed to be intentionally calling for him specifically. The wiry boy, with skin tanned from playing in the sun and smaller than others his age, slowly sat up. His eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness in the room. He scanned his surroundings, feeling a piercing chill coming from a dark corner of the hut. Boonthing's heart beat erratically. It was a feeling he had never had before, even though he had been seeing things others couldn't for as long as he could remember. But this time was different. It wasn't just a sight, but a sound so powerful it felt like it could rip his soul from his body. It was a sound filled with immense agony. The ringing of the bell grew more frequent, as if urging Boonthing to do something immediately. Boonthing hesitated for a moment. He remembered the warning of Luang Ta, who had cared for him since he was little. Luang Ta had always warned him never to enter the old cemetery on the hill under any circumstances, for it was the dwelling place of evil spirits and curses that ordinary people could not access. But today, curiosity overcame fear. He slowly got up from his mattress and walked straight to the old wooden window that was slightly ajar. Faint moonlight filtered through a curtain of mist, revealing only the dark, imposing silhouette of the cemetery standing on the hilltop. Boonthing felt an invisible force compelling him to go out and confront the source of that call. His body felt strangely hot. Excitement and fear mixed together, making them difficult to distinguish. The sound of the bell still echoed in his hearing, and he felt that it would never stop until he stepped into that cursed domain. Boonthing decided to step out of the old wooden hut. Wearing old, thin clothes, he went out the door into the darkness that shrouded the entire village. The quiet night made his footsteps echo all around, but no one knew of his departure. A faint glimmer of moonlight guided him, revealing a footpath that led into the forest. The surrounding atmosphere was unusually silent, with only the lonely, rhythmic chirping of nocturnal insects. The late-night air grew colder and colder until dew clung sparkling to the leaves by the path. Boonthing walked forward slowly, his heart still beating erratically with excitement and apprehension. He tried to gather all his courage to step into the forbidden land that everyone feared. The forest stretching out before him seemed to be swallowing the faint moonlight, making it even darker, and the boy could no longer turn back. The deeper Boonthing walked into the forest, the more the darkness intensified. The tall trees on both sides of the path enveloped him as if to swallow any living thing that dared to enter. The moonlight barely reached the ground, making it difficult to see the path. A faint mist began to form, shrouding the surroundings and making the atmosphere even more eerie and frightening. The musty smell of damp earth and decaying leaves hung in the air. The boy felt a cold breeze brush faintly past him, as if something was watching him from the darkness. A soft whisper, like the sound of wind rustling through branches, reached Boonthing's ears, making the hair all over his body stand on end instantly. He walked cautiously, trying not to make a sound, so that the mysterious entity he sensed would not notice his presence. But he knew it was probably already too late. Finally, Boonthing arrived at the foot of the hill where the old cemetery stood. The moonlight began to filter through the clouds, revealing a decaying wooden fence that surrounded it. The fence itself seemed to have rotted away over time, barely retaining its original form. The atmosphere here was completely different from the village. The silence was heavy, as if it could press everything down. The bell that had been ringing in Boonthing's ears was now silent, but the feeling of being drawn remained just as strong. He could feel an energy emanating from the cemetery. It was not a good feeling, but a mixture of sorrow, pain, and rage. Boonthing took a deep breath before stepping hesitantly through the decaying wooden fence into the forbidden zone. He knew well that this decision might lead him to something more terrifying than he could imagine, and it could be a step into true disaster. Inside the old cemetery, the atmosphere was like something out of the worst nightmare. Boonthing walked among the old graves scattered about. Many tombstones had toppled over. Some were broken beyond recognition, while others were so covered in moss and vines that their inscriptions were nearly invisible. The trees in the cemetery were all twisted, their branches tangled like limbs reaching out to grab him. Boonthing could feel pairs of unseen eyes staring at him from all directions. A deathly stench, like damp earth mixed with the smell of decay, hung in the air, making him so nauseous he could almost vomit. He tried to find the source of the bell's sound, but found nothing but emptiness and this chilling silence. The moon, occasionally peeking from behind the clouds, cast a dim light, revealing looming shadows that looked like human figures moving in the nooks between the trees, terrifying Boonthing the entire time he was there. As Boonthing continued to explore, his eyes caught something that made him stop dead in his tracks under the shadow of a large tree. It was the trace of freshly dug earth near an unmarked grave. The newly excavated soil was noticeably darker than the surrounding ground and still seemed moist. Boonthing slowly knelt to inspect it up close and found strange symbols drawn on the disturbed earth. They were distorted geometric shapes, mixed with lines that resembled ancient characters he had never seen before. The symbols seemed to give off a faint, eerie glow in the darkness, an unnervingly evil and terrifying energy. Boonthing felt a chilling current emanating from the characters, as if they were absorbing the life force from their surroundings. Despite his fear, Boonthing couldn't look away from what was before him. He sensed an intense, mysterious energy, and it told him that what he was facing was no coincidence. Suddenly, the sound of the old bell rang out again. This time, it was clearer and more resonant than ever, as if it were just a few steps away from Boonthing. He looked up and around in shock, the hair all over his body standing on end with fear. He felt as if a chilling breeze had faintly brushed past his neck, and he smelled a strange scent, like the fragrance of wild flowers mixed with the faint smell of blood. The bell continued to ring, as if to taunt and lure Boonthing deeper into the cemetery. Boonthing looked at the faint, looming shadow in the distance, which looked like a human figure moving slowly among the twisted trees. The rhythmic sound of the bell invited him to move forward, but the fear in his heart told him to run as far away as possible. Boonthing decided to follow the sound of the bell slowly, unaware of what awaited him, and that it might be worse than anything he could imagine. Boonthing walked deeper into the old cemetery, following the bell's sound that still echoed in his ears. The fog began to thicken, obscuring his vision until he could only see things faintly. The old, twisted trees swayed in the passing wind, as if moaning mournfully, making the atmosphere even more terrifying. The musty smell, mixed with a faint scent of blood, intermittently wafted to Boonthing's nose, making him feel deeply uneasy. He felt a chilling coldness pervading the area. Not the cold from the air, but a cold that came from something supernatural. Boonthing's heart pounded in his chest so loudly he could feel it. It was a feeling mixed with fear and an uncontrollable curiosity. Boonthing stopped in front of the recently disturbed grave, his eyes fixed on the faintly glowing characters on the ground. And then he saw something that made him jump in shock. In front of Boonthing, the translucent figure of a small girl slowly appeared. The figure was faint, like a wisp of smoke, wearing a white dress stained filthy with dirt. Her 2 pigtails were unraveled, and her pale face and hollow eyes stared at Boonthing with a vacant gaze. She showed no threat, but instead emanated a current of sorrow, grief, and pain that Boonthing could feel. The translucent girl tried to reach out her empty hand to touch Boonthing, as if asking for help, but her figure vanished in the blink of an eye when Boonthing tried to step closer. Boonthing's eyes widened in shock. He had never seen such a clear spirit before. It wasn't an illusion, but something tangible to his special sense. The girl reappeared just a few steps away. She tried to whisper, but Boonthing couldn't make out the words, yet he could feel the pain evident in every particle of that translucent form. The girl wasn't scary, but heartbreakingly pitiful, and it seemed she wanted to tell him something. The girl's spirit slowly backed away, then pointed her translucent finger towards the graves near the one that had been dug up. Boonthing followed her pointing finger and sensed an emptiness from those graves. It was as if the spirits that should have resided in them were gone. The translucent girl tried to communicate with pained body language. She pointed to the ground as if to say something was buried there, and Boonthing felt he received a message from her actions. What the girl's spirit wanted to convey was not a threat, but an urgent plea for help. Boonthing sensed a dark and evil energy emanating from the ground beneath those graves. His fear turned into sympathy. The girl's spirit looked incredibly sorrowful, and Boonthing felt she was begging him to help free her and the other bound spirits. Boonthing nodded at the girl's spirit as if to say he understood and would find a way to help. But then the girl's spirit slowly faded into the darkness, leaving only a chill and a feeling of gloom lingering in the air. After the terrifying night in the cemetery, Boonthing decided to travel to the forest temple at the edge of the village as soon as the first light of dawn began to shine. He wanted answers about what he had encountered, and there was only one person he could think of: Luang Ta Pan, the wise old monk respected by all the villagers. Luang Ta Pan's kuti was an old wooden building set in the middle of the forest, surrounded by large trees, creating a peaceful and shady atmosphere. Boonthing entered the kuti with a heart full of trepidation and many questions. He saw Luang Ta Pan sitting on an old mat. His body was thin, but his eyes were full of kindness and a calm energy. Luang Ta Pan was a very old monk, his face wrinkled with time, but his smile was warm and put those who met him strangely at ease. Luang Ta Pan nodded at Boonthing as if he knew he was coming, and calmly invited the boy to sit down before him. Boonthing recounted the entire story of what he had experienced in the cemetery the previous night in detail. Luang Ta Pan listened peacefully, not interrupting, and nodded from time to time. When Boonthing finished his story, Luang Ta Pan sighed slowly. His face showed clear signs of contemplation and worry. Luang Ta Pan began to tell the history of that old cemetery, that it was once a sacred place, but also a place where black magic was used long, long ago. He said that decades ago, an evil sorcerer named Jarn Sorn had used this cemetery as a place to perform rituals, enslaving spirits for his wicked purposes. Jarn Sorn was a tall, dark-skinned man with fierce eyes and arms covered in magical tattoos. He was driven out of the village long ago, and everyone believed he was dead. But Luang Ta Pan said that the energy Boonthing felt was Jarn Sorn's power, which had reappeared. Luang Ta Pan continued that Jarn Sorn didn't just summon spirits, he used methods to imprison and torture them into servitude, turning them into spirits full of vengeance and suffering. The girl's spirit that Boonthing saw is one of those spirits that is still trapped. Luang Ta Pan looked at Boonthing with eyes full of kindness and concern. He said that Boonthing had a special ability to see and communicate with spirits, a rare gift that very few people possessed. He warned Boonthing that stepping into the cursed area was extremely dangerous, but also admitted that Boonthing might be the only one who could stop Jarn Sorn's ritual. Luang Ta Pan said that Jarn Sorn had returned to perform a ritual to re-enslave all the spirits he had once imprisoned. If this ritual succeeded, the village would fall into a great catastrophe. Luang Ta Pan gave Boonthing an old sacred amulet, advising him to watch for traces of strange characters and symbols left by Jarn Sorn, as they were important clues to stopping this evil ritual. Boonthing accepted the amulet with determination. He felt the immense burden on his small shoulders, but was filled with a resolve to help the tormented spirits. Boonthing returned to the old cemetery again in the late afternoon. This time he wore a long-sleeved shirt and long pants to protect himself from insects and thorns from the dense bushes. The afternoon sun shone weakly through the canopy of large trees, making the atmosphere less frightening than at night, but an eerie and oppressive feeling still lingered throughout the area. Boonthing walked straight to the area where he had found the dug-up grave and the mysterious symbols. He tried to look for more clues as advised by Luang Ta Pan. Many graves in the area looked dilapidated and decayed by time. Some were almost sunken into the ground. The state of the cemetery indicated it had been abandoned for decades, with dense bushes overgrowing the tombstones, making them barely visible. Boonthing scanned his surroundings carefully. He noticed strange footprints on the damp ground and a piece of old black cloth lying nearby, which seemed unlikely to belong to anyone from the village. Despite the sunlight, a chilling cold still emanated from the ground, making Boonthing feel an unfriendly energy. Boonthing explored the graves the girl's spirit had pointed to the night before. He sensed a strange emptiness from them, as if the spirits that were supposed to reside within were truly gone. He carefully used a small stick to poke the dirt around the graves and found symbols similar to what he had seen last night, drawn repeatedly on the ground around several graves. These symbols weren't drawn by hand, but seemed to be created by some unseen energy. Boonthing used his special ability to touch the energy from those symbols, and an image flashed into his mind. It was a faint image of human figures bound by invisible chains. They were screaming in pain and torment, struggling to break free from their bonds. Boonthing felt their pain, too. The images grew clearer and clearer until he felt as if he were standing among those spirits himself. Sensing the immense suffering, Boonthing instantly understood that Jarn Sorn wasn't just summoning spirits. He was imprisoning these spirits for some evil purpose. Boonthing looked down at the ground covered in those cursed symbols with a sense of indignation. He now understood what Jarn Sorn was doing to these helpless spirits. He didn't just want corpses or wandering spirits. He was absorbing the life energy from the imprisoned spirits to increase his own power. Boonthing could feel the dark energy radiating from those empty graves, an energy filled with residual anger and pain. Boonthing looked up at the gray sky, which was beginning to darken again. He had made up his mind to stop Jarn Sorn, no matter the cost. This small boy recognized the immense mission before him. He had to find a way to free these tormented spirits, even if it meant facing evil all alone. His determination grew stronger, along with the feeling that he was no longer alone. As dusk fell once more, Boonthing returned to the cemetery with a stronger determination than ever. The air grew so cold it was bone-chilling. The fog was so thick he could barely see a few steps ahead. The atmosphere was gloomy and frighteningly silent. All surrounding sounds vanished, leaving only the wind that howled like the wails of tormented spirits. Following Luang Ta Pan's advice, Boonthing walked straight to the area where he had found the cursed symbols and could feel the most concentrated dark energy. The trees in that area looked lifeless, their branches tangled together like struggling limbs. Boonthing's eyes stared at the ground covered in strange symbols. The faint moonlight cast just enough light to reveal the faint silhouettes of what looked like spirits pinned to the ground. Boonthing knew he had to use his special sense to access the truth hidden behind that energy, and this was his last chance. Boonthing slowly closed his eyes, trying to gather all his concentration. He felt the dark, evil energy radiating from the symbols on the ground. The energy was so intense it caused him pain throughout his body. Suddenly, a vision appeared clearly in his consciousness. It was an image of Jarn Sorn, a tall, fierce-looking man covered in script tattoos, performing a gruesome ritual. He used an enchanted sword to cut into the ground and force hundreds of spirits to appear. They manifested in torment, their eyes filled with fear and pain. Jarn Sorn used black magic to bind them with invisible chains, forcing them to become his slaves. The spirits screamed in agony, struggling in vain to break free from their bonds. The vision was so clear that Boonthing felt as if he were standing amidst the evil ritual himself. He could sense the despair and resentment packed within those imprisoned spirits, and this was the truth. Boonthing opened his eyes again in shock and rage. Tears streamed from his eyes out of pity for those spirits suffering so terribly. The energy from the vision still lingered in his senses. He now knew that Jarn Sorn wasn't just summoning spirits. He was using them as tools to increase his own power. Luang Ta Pan had said that Jarn Sorn wanted to absorb the life energy from these spirits to make himself stronger. And that was why this cemetery had become a nexus of darkness and suffering. Boonthing could sense the faint whispers of the imprisoned spirits. They were begging him to help set them free. The boy took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about stopping the ritual, but about freeing these bound spirits and returning them to peace, even if it meant facing the ultimate evil. Boonthing clutched Luang Ta Pan's amulet tightly in his hand. He felt a certain power radiating from it, and it gave him hope. That night was the final dark moon, when darkness plunged everything into its depths. Boonthing returned to the cemetery once more, determined to face the truth that awaited him. The air was so cold, his breath turned to vapor. A thick, ominous black fog had formed, making it nearly impossible to see ahead. The whistling of the wind against dry branches created a lamenting sound, like the weeping of spirits. Boonthing walked straight to the center of the cemetery, where he saw a strange stone altar now clearly visible. An evil, deep red glow emanated from the altar, illuminating the entire area and revealing numerous translucent figures pinned around the ceremonial platform. They were screaming and struggling in pain. Boonthing felt an immense power erupting from the altar, an energy filled with an unprecedented level of evil and darkness. He understood instantly that Jarn Sorn's final ritual was about to begin, and he had to stop it, no matter how. Fear began to eat at his heart, but his determination was even stronger. As Boonthing stood before the altar, a tall, shadowy figure slowly emerged from the ominous black fog. The figure was faint, like black smoke, yet it exuded a formidable power. It was Jarn Sorn, the black magic sorcerer who had once been exiled from the village. Jarn Sorn's crimson glowing eyes stared at Boonthing as if to devour any living thing in his path. A hoarse, chilling laugh echoed in the air like a whisper from the pits of hell. Jarn Sorn spoke words filled with incantations and magic, attempting to subdue Boonthing's mind. Boonthing felt an invisible pressure crushing his body, making it almost impossible to breathe. The spirits bound around the altar began to scream and struggle more violently, as if agitated by Jarn Sorn's power. Some tried to lunge at Boonthing in fury, only to be pulled back by invisible chains. Jarn Sorn smiled wickedly, delighting in the suffering of these spirits, and seemingly confident that no one could stop his ritual. Boonthing clutched the amulet in his hand tightly, softly chanting the protective mantra Luang Ta Pan had taught him. A faint white glow emanated from the amulet, shielding him from Jarn Sorn's dark energy. The bound spirits continued to scream and struggle violently, trying to harm Boonthing under Jarn Sorn's command. Boonthing looked at them with pain, sensing the immense suffering they were enduring. He knew he had to do something to set them free before Jarn Sorn could absorb all their energy. The boy took a deep breath, gathering all his courage. Jarn Sorn began to chant his final spell, his voice echoing throughout the cemetery. A powerful wave of dark energy surged towards Boonthing, who had to use all his strength to resist. Jarn Sorn seemed much stronger, and this was the true confrontation Boonthing had to win. He had to protect these innocent spirits and stop Jarn Sorn's evil from spreading. In the critical moment when Jarn Sorn's dark energy was about to completely consume Boonthing, he gathered all his remaining strength. He clutched Luang Ta Pan's amulet tightly, closing his eyes and chanting a mantra that Luang Ta Pan had taught him for times of need. Boonthing's chanting voice was faint, yet it held a power that could shake Jarn Sorn's evil energy. A pure, gentle white light shot out from Boonthing's amulet, clashing with the dark red and black light radiating from Jarn Sorn. This created a massive energy storm that swirled throughout the cemetery. The impact of the energies caused the ceremonial altar to vibrate violently, making the old tombstones around it shake and topple over. The shrieks of the bound spirits echoed all around as they struggled violently, as if awakened from a long slumber. The stench of blood and sulfur filled the air. The atmosphere was filled with ultimate chaos and terror. Boonthing knew well that this was his last chance to stop this evil ritual and set the tormented spirits free. Boonthing used his special sense to communicate with the bound spirits. He tried to send a pure mental current to awaken them to resist Jarn Sorn's power. Boonthing's whisper penetrated the depths of their souls, telling them to fight for their own freedom. The spirits, once dominated by darkness, began to scream with rage, not at Boonthing, but at Jarn Sorn, who had imprisoned them for decades. The energy of their resentment and pain transformed into a counterforce that violently struck Jarn Sorn. The ceremonial altar shook maniacally as if it would collapse. Jarn Sorn roared in pain, trying to force the spirits back under his command. But their resistance only grew stronger. The magical light that once shone from Jarn Sorn's body began to flicker noticeably. His face contorted with rage and pain. He had never imagined that a small boy like Boonthing could incite the spirits he had controlled for so long to rise up against him. Finally, the power of Boonthing's goodness and determination triumphed over Jarn Sorn's evil. The invisible chains that bound the spirits began to shake and slowly break apart. The pure white light from Boonthing's amulet spread throughout the cemetery, freeing the tormented spirits. The spirits screamed with joy. They no longer showed anger, but were filled with gratitude and a sense of relief. Jarn Sorn's translucent form began to fade into the darkness, along with screams of pain and resentment. The dark energy that had once covered the cemetery started to dissipate, replaced by a cool tranquility that spread through the air. Boonthing collapsed to the ground in exhaustion, but a smile of relief appeared on his face. He could feel a current of peace emanating from the freed spirits. The spirits waved goodbye to Boonthing with thanks before slowly floating away into the darkness like a passing breeze. The old cemetery returned to peace once more, leaving only Boonthing sitting amidst the silence with the feeling that he had accomplished a great mission. As the first light of dawn shone into the old cemetery, the atmosphere that was once filled with darkness and fear suddenly changed. A cool serenity spread throughout the area. A faint white fog still covered the ground, but it was no longer a fog of darkness. Boonthing slowly stood up. He felt extremely exhausted, but his heart was filled with relief and joy for having completed the great mission. The morning sunlight shone through the line of trees in golden rays, gently touching Boonthing's skin. The stench of blood and sulfur that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by the clean smell of damp earth and morning plants. Boonthing glanced around the cemetery, which had now returned to peace. The graves and tombstones that once looked terrifying now seemed like ordinary old stones. The once twisted trees seemed to have relaxed. The darkness that had covered everything had faded, leaving only a silence filled with mercy and forgiveness. Boonthing knew well that the spirits who were once tormented had been set free, and they had departed in peace. Boonthing walked slowly out of the old cemetery. He felt the scar in his heart from this experience, but it was a scar that had made him much stronger. He followed the same path back to the village. The morning sunlight grew brighter and brighter, chasing away all the remaining darkness. Along the way, Boonthing thought of Luang Ta Pan's words that his special sense was a great gift. And now he understood the deep meaning of those words. Boonthing didn't know what his future held. He might still see and sense mysterious things that ordinary people could not. But he was no longer afraid. He felt as if he had received a new mission in life, to help those who suffer, whether they are human or spirit. His mind was filled with peace and determination. He was no longer the same timid boy, but had grown into someone who truly understood the world of spirits. When Boonthing returned to his old wooden hut, Long Ken and Pa Jan, who had been waiting worriedly, rushed out to greet him with faces full of relief. They immediately saw the change in Boonthing. The boy's eyes looked much more composed and understanding of the world than before. Boonthing told them the whole story in detail. Long Ken and Pa Jan listened with shock and pride in the boy they had raised. Luang Ta Pan visited Boonthing the next day. He looked at Boonthing with eyes full of admiration and said that Boonthing had done a great thing and brought peace back to this village. Boonthing could feel the peaceful energy radiating from the old cemetery. It was a true peace that came from the release of all the tormented spirits. The story of the call from the cemetery might be over, but Boonthing's journey in the world of spirits had only just begun. And he was ready to face whatever awaited him with courage and an understanding of the nature of the unseen, mysterious world.